Hello. Hi, can you all hear me? Welcome to our Humanities Day panel on the arts and humanities in collaboration. I'm Srikanth Reddy. I'm a poet and literary scholar in the Department of English and the program in creative writing here at the university. And I'll be moderating and participating in today's conversation about an exciting new suite of arts labs projects that are now underway here at the Neubauer Collegium. What is an arts lab? We're making it up as we go along. During this historic transition of the division of the humanities at the university to its new name, the Division of the Arts and Humanities, the university is becoming a place where scholarly research and artistic making come together under one roof, or under many roofs, and this is one of those here at the Neubauer Collegium, which is hosting our group's Art Labs projects. Arts Labs are a way of thinking about how to incubate and launch this new work that combines creativity, the arts part of Arts Labs, and research and innovation, the labs part of Arts Labs. And over the course of our conversation, I'll try not to slip into calling these projects art slabs, which we're really trying not to make them. So under my colleague David Levin's leadership, a group of faculty who are working at the intersection of the arts and humanities on campus have put together a grant proposal to the Neubauer Collegium, which has been very generously supported here. And we are now already underway with 5 different kind of innovative new projects in the arts, in different modalities, in different media, in different styles, different scales, including work in our international centers and in independent theater and literary publishing partnerships, all coming out of this new Arts Labs project. So today we'll share 5 of our projects, and I won't give bios for our guests today. I'll just ask everyone to introduce themselves as we move along. These are really diverse projects, and I'm really excited about talking with you all and talking with you about what we're doing here at the university as we try and imagine new kind of horizons for what it means to be a thinker and a maker here at the University of Chicago with our students and colleagues. So what we'll do today is we'll each kind of introduce our projects, and then we'll have time for questions from you, from our live audience, and also from our virtual audience after we've presented our projects. And we're grateful to the Collegium for making a home not just for our projects, but also a home for art on the University of Chicago campus through a variety of initiatives and exhibitions that are ongoing. And after our Q&A at the end of this panel today, you'll have an opportunity to visit a new art exhibit by the Autolith Group just down the hallway from here. We're also going to show a video in this room, if you'd like to stay after the panel, that is about the exhibit. And that will be also on display for our online virtual participants today. So afterwards, please join us for the video. If you're online, you can watch the video. If you're here, you can walk over to the exhibit, or you can watch the video and then walk over to the exhibit. It's so many possibilities. So now, without further ado, I'll just launch into my own Arts Lab project here at the Neubauer. New directions in literary publishing. If I can cue the slide that I made with this was the extent of my technological prowess. So I'll talk to you about new directions in literary publishing, and then David will. The font took me a while to actually find. Then David will.
The audio, not so much.
Okay, maybe we don't need this one. David will talk about his project, and then Julia Rhoads will talk about her project, Tina Post will talk about hers, and Leslie Danzig will talk about hers as well. And then we'll open to questions and answers. Okay, so new directions in literary publishing. I'm a poet. I've been teaching here at the university for over 20 years now. And 3 years ago, I was invited to serve as a guest editor, as part of a guest editor program at the poetry magazine situated right downtown here. We curated 3 special issues on the first Black woman who was in the editorial staff of Poetry Magazine, Margaret Danner. And then we went from the local to the national and published work by poets in our second issue who write in English as a second language or English as another language. And then in our third issue, we published an issue that we called Make It Old, that's about ancient poetries in translation. And since then, I kind of caught the editorial bug, and I've gotten involved in more and more literary editorial projects here and elsewhere. So now I currently serve as poetry editor at the Paris Review, and I've also worked with the University of Chicago Press on the relaunch of a venerable poetry book publishing series at the press called Phoenix Poets. And I also work with Chicago Review, which is a really dynamic, exciting, graduate student-run literary magazine here on campus. So I thought I'd just share a little glimpse of how that kind of shift in my life from being a writer to being someone who's an editor who sees the other side of the publishing equation has impacted my life here at the university. So if I can cue the next, I think we skipped one. There we go. There. Okay. So this is my office at the university. It used to be a beautiful office. I had plants, and my desk was clear, and I didn't have. This looks like I just moved in. I've been in this office for 15 years now, and it's a glimpse of the ruin that can come upon you when you start to have books coming in boxes, manuscripts printed out that start to get yellow around the edges because you haven't replied to them, and just I had to roll up my rug and put it on a chair. This is because of the incredible vibrancy of the art of poetry in the world today. There are so many writers out there, and they're so hungry to get published that when I was at Poetry Magazine, we received about 100,000 poems each year that we had to read and pluck needles from that haystack. At the Paris Review, where I now am the poetry editor, we receive only about 30,000 per year, but we don't have the infrastructure of the Poetry Foundation behind us, and sometimes even reading one poem can take a really long time. So thousands and thousands of poems is really an overwhelming. It's a great problem to have, but it's a big problem. In the field of book publishing, at the Phoenix Poets series at the University of Chicago Press, we received over 300 full-length, book-length manuscripts of poetry to review in 1 month, in the month of October. So this is just an impossible. Poetry has become a problem in my life as a result of this, and so I thought, I've been thinking, how do you find the most exciting, moving, innovative poetry of today and tomorrow under these conditions, right? So I thought, well, maybe the university can help. And so with support from the Neubauer Collegium, we're piloting a new arts lab project called New Directions in Contemporary Literary Publishing to try and imagine ways of bringing different research fields at the university to identify literary communities and social networks that have been overlooked by kind of the old school forms of literary editorial work. You know, a guy with a cigar in an office like this just reading a lot of poetry and gatekeeping, right? So we've brought on board 4 emerging poets and literary editors who have expertise in contemporary American poetry, of course, but also in the fields of Black studies, literatures of the Global South, and the broad field of literary translation, to serve as advisory poetry editors in partnership with the Paris Review and the University of Chicago Press. I thought, you know, let's bring on more people to get more eyeballs on all of this stuff, and instead, it's made the problem worse in some ways, because these 4 extremely exciting, well-connected, curious readers are tapping their literary networks and bringing in new poetry from unexpected quarters. So with the help of Kai Eanes here at the University of Chicago, Imani Elizabeth Jackson, whose last editorial position was with the St. Mark's Poetry Project in New York City, Aditi Machado at the University of Cincinnati, and Margaret Ross, who is now at the University of Iowa, we've begun to identify voices out there who might have been overlooked if I alone were trying to do this work, right? And as a result, we're already, just at the very beginning of this work, we're very excited to be publishing 5 first-time contributors in the poetry selections at the Paris Review. 5 out of 7 of the poets in this new issue are first-time contributors, which is really quite unprecedented for such a kind of venerable literary institution. But we want to not only diversify contemporary literary publishing in the field of poetry magazines, we want to do this in book publishing as well. So our poet editors are also reading manuscripts, and they're soliciting poetry from poets out there for publication in the Phoenix Books Poets Series. This is also a mentorship program for young writers who are at the beginning of their careers. We don't want to just find poets out there. We want to kind of train a next generation of literary editors to identify and promote a wider range of artistic expression. So we meet with as a group with these advisory editors. We talk about new directions in contemporary American writing, new organizations and periodicals that foster original work, and new strategies for editorial practice in that kind of multimedia landscape that includes social media and things that I know nothing about. So we hope to bring this group to the Neubauer Collegium for more conversations with our faculty and students, and help to see how we can actually not only enrich these partner organizations, but also enrich the conversation about the arts on campus. So I thought I'd just end with a poem. I started with this mess, and so I thought, why not show you one of the needles that we have found in the haystack. If we could move to the next slide. And this is a really beautiful and strange, and to me very moving poem by the Assyrian-Iraqi poet Sargon Boulos. He's a fascinating figure in modern Arabic poetry. He's made his way from Kirkuk to California by way of Baghdad and Beirut. May have had an assist from the CIA along the way. He himself translated ancient Chinese poetry like Du Fu and American beat poets like Allen Ginsberg into Arabic. He's become kind of a hero to a new generation of young emerging Arab poets and literary figures. In this, to me, quite nervy and artful translation by a young poet and translator named Miles Mikovsky, you'll see how this kind of work can actually bring voices from the recent past and from other cultures into to readership here in the United States. Now, what's special to me about this particular poem is that Mikovsky is currently finishing his undergraduate degree here at the University of Chicago. And this poem is coming out in the next issue of the Paris Review. So it's a kind of a sneak preview of the work that we're doing through the Literary Publishing Arts Lab. But it's also a preview of what's coming out of new work in the arts and publishing, and literary publishing here at the university. So I'll read this poem and then I'll hand over things to David. Actually, maybe I'll read it on paper. There are journeys. I arrive in my country after crossing a river astrologers immerse themselves in with their rusty instruments, searching for the stars. Or I don't arrive in my country. After crossing a river no one sinks in. There are journeys I return from, thin as a needle's shadow. I meet the morning face to face, as if I'd left a tunnel behind a moment ago. Steam rises under my hand from a lovely coffee cup, cracked like the wall of an orphanage. I meet a farmer who lost his mind in the famines, begging in the big city evenings. And a woman walking by the light of her white hair through ruins. I free my eyes and journey on. Let obscure openings take me like a father who knows better than I my aims. They hold out their terrible gifts to me with sweaty, attentive hands, like someone carrying a droplet of water through a desert. And the touch led and drove me like heartbeats traveling to meet me. At the end of every cave, a candle summons me to sit at a table my grandparents wept and swore and fasted at. And every shout from any distant window wakes me from my deepest dreams. So I follow it like the blind man who raids the air with his hands toward enemy territories, where his eyes were smuggled and a ransom demanded. I hear the wind in my fingernails, and I know where my bride is hidden. Thank you.
Thanks, Chicu. I'm David Levin. I teach in theater and performance studies, in Germanic studies, and in cinema and media studies. I'm leading an arts lab that I'm calling Opera Lab on contemporary interpretation. Over the course of the past decade, the American stage director and visionary theater maker Yuval Sharon has made a name for himself with conceptually provocative and theatrically startling work. In 2018, he was the first American director to direct a production of Wagner's work, in this case Lohengrin, at the Wagner Festival in Bayreuth, and his production of Mozart's Magic Flute at the Staatsoper in Berlin was controversial in part because of its thoroughgoing rethinking of the piece's representational stakes. Sharon received a MacArthur Award in 2017 in recognition of his transformational impact upon the practices of opera stagings. He just published a book with Norton that he called, somewhat modestly, A New Philosophy of Opera, and will be at the University of Chicago throughout this year. I'll get to that in a moment, but more particularly, it's important to underscore that he'll be delivering the Berlin Family Lectures in May at the University of Chicago at the Logan Center for the Arts. The Berlin Family Lectures is a really distinguished and exciting lecture series sponsored by by the Berlin family and the Humanities division. It's an annual lecture series that brings transformative thinkers to the university for a series of lectures that are then published by the University of Chicago Press. That's Yuval. When I was an undergraduate, I somewhat modestly decided that it was important to rethink the aesthetics of opera, and that the way to do so, although I was a theory nerd, was to bring theoretical preoccupations into dialogue with stage practice. So I went as a junior, as an undergraduate, to the Frankfurt Opera, where it turns out they were doing what it seemed to me I was aspiring to. And after I graduated, I went back to the Frankfurt Opera and spent a couple of years working there before I decided I really needed to go to graduate school. And then when I was in graduate school at Berkeley, I decided I had to go back to the Frankfurt Opera because the work I was doing in the classroom, as exciting and interesting as it was unsatisfying because I really wanted to be in the rehearsal room. But when I was in the rehearsal room, it felt like the work was unsatisfying because it wasn't intellectually adventurous enough, and so I had to go back to Berkeley. And this was before frequent flyer, mileage meant anything, but I sort of zipped back and forth every 2 years between Berkeley and Frankfurt. And eventually ended up taking an academic position where I wrote my First, I wrote my dissertation on Wagner and Fritz Lang and the stakes of performance for each of these amazing artists, but then took an academic position in which I could continue to think about Wagner, opera, and performance, which I did starting at Columbia University way, way long ago. And then I've been at the University of Chicago, like Chicu, for more than 20 years, and have continued to think about Wagner and performance. What's important to note here is that I've tried, while being a professor, to continue to work in performance. So I've worked on productions at Lyric Opera of Chicago, in Munich, somewhat less in the neighborhood, at the Bavarian State Opera, and currently I'm working on 2 productions, one this season at Court Theater, an adaptation of the graphic novel Berlin by Jason Lutz, which Charlie Newell will be directing. Julia Rhoads, who's sitting next to me, is working on this production as well. And then next year on a production, but since Court Theater hasn't announced its productions for next year, I'm not going to talk about that. What I will talk about, though, is that the work of Richard Wagner remains central to the work that I do. I've written a couple of books on Wagner and the stakes of performance for Wagner. And as I was still working at the Frankfurt Opera, worked on a couple of productions, Ruth Berghaus's production of Parsifal and her production of The Ring Cycle in Frankfurt. Yuval Sharon and I met in the early 2000s and have repeatedly sought out opportunities for collaborations. Shortly after he received the invitation to go to Bayreuth to prepare Lohengrin, we invited him to the Neubauer Collegium, and about 20 graduate students and faculty joined him in a conversation a year before he went into the rehearsal room to think with him about the stakes of his production. What was he going to do? How was he going to do it? It was a kind of dramaturgical, intensive immersion laboratory. And then when Yuval came back to Chicago in 2023 to direct Proximity, a collection of 3 contemporary operas, 15 of us from the faculty and graduate students went to the dress rehearsal, and then Yuval came with a couple of his collaborators to talk to us about what we saw, what they saw, and how we could be thinking about this triptych of pieces. Yuval and I were in conversation, but we weren't yet in the rehearsal room. This past summer, the Metropolitan Opera in New York announced that they had invited Yuval to direct their next production of Wagner's Ring Cycle. And in the wake of that call, not immediately, I think he called his parents before he called, but he did call and say, look, we've been trying to collaborate for a really long time. Let's work on this together. And so This production of Wagner's Ring, so the tetralogy, will start in 2027. One production in the fall of 27, spring of 28, fall of 28, spring of 29, and the entire cycle in 2030. And the idea is, for our opera lab, although Wagner would be, I think, affronted that the Ring of the Nibelungen would be in an opera lab. For him, it would be a music drama lab, or indeed an artwork of the future lab. And I think that's entirely consonant with Yuval's sense. But our hope is to convene here with a group of colleagues, as we have been doing, to try to think through the representational ambitions, the politics, the history, the baggage, and there's a great deal of baggage. Some of it was in Chiku's office. You might have seen in the corner of the picture of his office that he just showed us. And a lot of that baggage is really difficult to unpack. But that's what the Neubauer Collegium and the University of Chicago is about. My hope is that right now I'm team teaching a course on contemporary productions of The Ring, right? Which is to say, this is a place where the work we do in the laboratory is also work we're doing in the classroom. It's collaborative work across disciplines with graduate students and undergraduates. I'll say this class that I'm team teaching this quarter is an advanced graduate class. There are 6 PhD students in the class, 2 JD students from the law school, and of course, since it's the University of Chicago, 1 undergraduate who is right there with us, fighting the good fight, and it's a thrill and a delight to be able to work with these students, as exceptionally bright as they are, to try to think through Wagner. And the project of our lab will be to prepare this production in a way that is adequate to our theoretical ambitions, to the complexity of the work, in ways that directors, as you all probably know, simply don't have time to do. Directors are under enormous pressure to produce. So the thought that you could recede into a laboratory in order to wrestle with this work over time is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm incredibly grateful to the Neubauer Collegium for sponsoring this, to the Humanities Division for letting it interact with our teaching and for providing us with the support that brings us to this initiative. We started with an initial Arts Lab seminar that we're convening where all of us are in conversation with each other yesterday, and that was enormously exciting. We're at the very beginning of what I hope is a long journey. It's exciting to share it with you, although at this point it's something to come, and hopefully we can reconvene at some point, maybe in New York, and you can see what came of this. Thanks so much for your attention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Rhoads, and I'm the Director of Dance at the University of Chicago in Theater and Performance Studies. And I also teach in TAPS. And I'm also the founding artistic director of Lucky Plush Productions, which is a dance theater company here in Chicago. The Lucky Plush is also the context for my creative research and creative work that I also bring back to the classroom with students. So Lucky Plush creates original work that addresses contemporary themes, and we do this through a complex layering of choreography, dialogue, humor, vocal work, and immersive visual design. The project that is being supported through the Neubauer Arts Lab is a collaboration with Leslie Buxbaum, who's here on the panel, and who I've worked with on numerous past projects. We're bringing on Devontae Johnson, who is the new Director of Design in Theater and Performance Studies. He's going to do projection design and media design. And then we're also working with Lucky Plush's 6-person devising ensemble, many of whom have worked with us anywhere between 7 and 20 years. So there's a long history of synergy and trust, both in the making process and in the performance practice. Before I say anything about this project that we're working on through Neubauer's support through this Arts Lab, I'm going to share an excerpt of past work so that you get a sense of the formal and aesthetic vocabularies that we work with in the company. This particular excerpt is from a work called Trip the Light Fantastic, a making of Super Strip. The Making of Superstrip. And it follows a group of washed-up superheroes who are reinventing themselves in a think tank for do-gooders, but they can't really agree on their mission, and so they get caught up in the circularity of meeting culture, which is something that maybe is a little bit where art meets life. So we can...
In a world where injustice
prevails
and
and the forces of evil are too complex for the most well-intentioned hero, seven formerly known and lesser well-known superheroes join forces to collectively ignite change.
Okay, see, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, do we need a mission first, or do we come up with a name? I think we need a strategic planning process. Even if it's...
Aren't we going to have to hire a consultant to do that? Yeah. I think we have that in the budget right now.
Oh, well, we can write a grant to hire a consultant, can't we?
See, to write a grant, you have to have not-for-profit status, and to get not-for-profit status, you have to have a mission.
You know, actually, I do think we can apply for that grant if we do it under a fiscal sponsorship.
Yeah, but we still need a name for that, though, right?
Okay, well, what if we come up with some sort of interim name?
I had 3 main powers, you know? First one is that I could make things disappear. Mostly pizzas and boxes of wine. And my second power was that I was a super napper. I could sleep anywhere at any time. And anyway, but mostly I was known because I could fly.
Wow, that's awesome.
Brings together a group of transracial and post-heteronormative individuals whose identities have been consciously and culturally constructed in temporal realities to establish the appearance of an essentialized ontological core self through the repetition of a series of stylized bodily acts.
I agree to disagree. I am still an immigrant, so I should be at the bottom.
You know, you are actually a couple shades lighter than me, so you should stand down this way.
I don't actually know if I would know you were an immigrant just by looking at you. Well, plus you're a man, so you'll always make more money than me.
You know what? With this accent, it's so hard to find jobs.
Hey, what if we look at this through the lens of our education?
Oh, I have my Master's of Fine Arts. So...
I'd like to teach the planet to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it in my arms and play with harmony. I'd like to teach the planet to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it in my arms and play with harmony. I'd like to teach the...
Hopefully that just gives you a sense of the kind of formal vocabularies that we play with in the layering of forms, with the dialogue and humor, and just to get at the subject that we're thinking about. The Neubauer Arts Lab supported by that Leslie and I are working on with Lucky Plush is called Facing, and it launches from a 1926 Eugene O'Neill play called The Great God Brown. O'Neill's play follows a triangle of relationships that are complicated by obsession, professional jealousies, and betrayals. Characters put on and take masks off based on how willing they are to be vulnerable with each other. And the play grows increasingly farcical and tragic as they adopt one another's masks in a tangle of mixed up identities. So rather than using literal masks, Leslie and I are interested in contemporary forms of masking. So in early workshops, we worked through scenes where characters generated avatars through Snapchat and FaceTime, like memojis, and we created choreography that evoked the dynamics of how we navigate through social media platforms. We started to stage the play scenes with a strategic switching of masked selves to explore the nuances of covering up our vulnerabilities, revealing how many times in a day we calibrate our presences with each other. We choose to text instead of call. We might send a Zoom link instead of showing up in an in-person meeting. Perhaps we post our condolences online instead of sitting with someone in their grieving. So these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in the play and also in the new piece that we're jumping off from. So the next year, Leslie and I will undertake a writing process to develop a blueprint for the script and performance score that is inspired by the central characters and circumstances of O'Neill's play, but that spins out into an entirely new psychological drama. We are also bringing our designers and ensemble into this process through regular meetings, and we're going to culminate next June into a residency that will be a production residency to explore the design elements in Logan Center next June that will culminate in a work in progress showing that will ideally be in Theater West. So we'll keep people posted.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. I'm Tina Post. I teach in theater and performance studies. I'm a member of the English department. Sometimes teach in art history, sort of float around the humanities division. My lab that I'm going to talk about today is Movement Theory Lab, which is not a newly devised lab, but the evolution of a multi-year project. So a little over 4 years ago, in June of 2020, I started a reading group with a handful of PhD students who were interested in thinking about movement and dance studies. And since that initial meeting, we've developed a core group of regular attendees, largely from theater and performance studies, or TAPS, and art history, but also with long-term, slightly more itinerant visitors from Romance languages and literatures, anthropology, East Asian languages and cultures, and even some practitioners from outside the university. The group's monthly readings and discussions intersect a broad range of fields, including dance history, performance studies, aesthetic theory, cultural studies, art history, disability studies, political theory, the history of science and medicine, and the study of race, ethnicity, and indigeneity. And at this point, nearly 4.5 years since our inception, I keep a spreadsheet of everything. We've discussed nearly 100 texts and viewings together, so it's become a really substantial sort of curricular annex for the PhD students who are interested in that kind of work. And about 2 years ago, some of us decided to occasionally get into a room together and kind of noodle about in an embodied way in addition to our readings. Sometimes this was directly tied to a text. So at one point, we enacted the score for Simone Forti's Huddle after reading both Simone Forti's book and a piece by Ethan Philbrick about it. And sometimes it was just a chance to think about, to think with and through our bodies a little bit in a much less structured way. At the same time, about 2 years ago, the TAPS PhD program added a curricular component called SLIPR, September Lab and Performances Research, directed by our illustrious colleagues David and Leslie, the idea of which was to give students a well-resourced opportunity to get research questions on their feet. And students who had been reading with Movement Theory Reading Group were a substantial part of that first cohort and did, I think, marvelous practice as research projects. So part of the idea was that movement theory could be a resource for students who wish to continue movement-based research agendas in an embodied as well as a bookish way. So we held formal as well as informal choreographic meetings with the support of Julia and the tutelage of an ACLS fellow, Elliot Mercer. We learned Yvonne Rayner's formative work of postmodern dance trio A, which some students then went on to perform during the university's pro show in the winter quarter. But meetings were always a little ad hoc. It could be hard to get a room on a week-to-week basis. Schedules were unreliable with that short of a lead time and so forth. So Neubauer funding has given us a chance to formalize our embodied work and to add extra resources to that list. Movement Theory Lab still meets once a month to discuss readings or viewings, but we now also meet at least once a month for a movement-based session consisting of a warm-up, a lead exercise, and time at the end for members to use one another to help visualize a project or question. We're also using Neubauer funds to bring guest artists to lead us in movement-generating workshops. This fall, 2 internationally known Montreal-based artists will be visiting, Laura Kramer, an Indigenous choreographer, and Angelique Wilkie, a dance theater maker who teaches at Concordia University. And the Rebuild Foundation is also helping pitch in funds for Angelique to do a showing of her award-winning work in collaboration with someone named Melanie Demers. It's called Confession Publique, so that's really exciting. And finally, the artist Melinda Jean Myers, this is with help from Julia, who's faculty at the University of Iowa, will be coming to teach set works by the choreographer Trisha Brown. So again, a mix of sort of formal learning, established repertoire pieces, and then just figuring things out for ourselves. Importantly, the premature of the Neubauer has meant that Movement Theory Lab has also had success finding funding from other quarters of the university, success breeds success, that sort of thing, for what's turned out to be incredibly important additions to our program. So namely with support from the International Institute for Research in Paris, I, along with 5 of the PhD students, attended the summer university program of the Performing Arts Forum in Santerre, France this past August. PATH, as it's known, was founded by a choreographer and maintains ongoing partnerships with performance pedagogy institutions from across Europe, including Part School for Contemporary Dance in Brussels, the Dutch Art Institute in Arnhem, Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, and Klaskin Conservatory in Ghent. So it's really exciting to throw University of Chicago in the mix with all those other institutions. Summer University itself offers a rangy program of performances, screenings, discussions, and experiments. And during our time there, we worked and played and studied with filmmakers, artists, and scholar practitioners from across Europe, which I think was really a game changer for everyone who went. And also, I think if at this point we were to go again, we could be among the programmed presenters and not only attendees, either as a group or as individual scholar artists or both. So that was a really exciting development. So to close with just a couple of things about the lab, because mostly I'm interested in what questions you all have. First, the lab is committed to both shared and individual research questions, but when push comes to shove, we're more importantly a resource for the latter. So there are themes that have run through our 4-year reading that are shared, provocations or considerations, which include the problem of embodied abstraction, or the relative primacy of space or time in choreographic work, or the calibration and reception of emotional expression, which, spoiler alert, is historically contingent. And while our individual researchers are working through questions like, how can embodied performance aestheticize the erosion of bodies or the erosion of land, and where do these overlap, or what kinds of vulnerability can a masculine comportment perform before it reads as compromised, and why those in particular? And in some ways, those big questions remain big questions because they're in some ways unsolvable, whereas the sort of more research-driven, it might be that there's no answer there either, but there might be like a suite of answers that people can come to more provisionally, so it's a different kind of question-answer. And then second thing is that our aim in our space and training and practice together is not technical virtuosity, so the point isn't at all that our dancers become good dancers. But rather we're hoping for a kind of conceptual virtuosity that we can couple with really excellent tools for making and devising, and really smart interlocutors who know one another's works, one another's ideas, who share a vocabulary. So that is Movement Theory Lab. Yay.
All right, hi all. Last project of the day. My name is Leslie Buxbaum, and I'm an associate professor of practice in theater and performance studies. I work as a theater director and a writer. I usually work across forms, so dance theater with Lucky Plush, circus theater, clown theater, puppet theater. But for the last 5 years, I've been writing a musical called Out Here. I started with a script, and now we have what we call the tripod. The tripod is myself, David, and Erin McKeown. We do conceptual development together, and then I'm the book and co-lyricist, book writer and co-lyricist. Erin, who is based in Western Massachusetts, is the other co-lyricist and composer of music. We've had fantastic pathways of development here at the university, and now it is in development at the Court Theater, which, if you don't know the Court Theater, it's a Tony Award-winning regional theater that's part of University of Chicago. So that's exciting, and I'm very deep in it right now. In the shower this morning, I think I connected something, because I'm in rewrites towards the next workshop, which will be this winter. I'm also teaching 2 classes this quarter, Queering the American Family Drama and New Musical Development, both of which are informed by this project and kind of speak back to the project. So there's really nice reciprocity there. And I'm going to share now a 3.5-minute video. It's of excerpts from the workshop that we did in June of 2023. So It's already been developed more since then and continues to go year after year. What you'll see is actors have scripts on music stands, so nobody was asked to memorize anything. This was just a way for them to learn the music, get a little familiar with the scene work, and just sort of feel what it is to have it be somewhat on its feet, to understand what is working and, most importantly, what is not working. And it was in Theater West, which we've referred to a few times, which is in the Logan Center for the Arts. So I think we're ready for the video.
Mom, Dad, there are people here.
Are you expecting anyone?
No. Clee, who is it? Lots of people. Like right outside.
It might be the garden walk.
I don't think our house would be on the garden walk. They're probably just walking by. No, they're like sitting right here. Well, this is our daughter Cleo. Hello. And I'm Dawn. Hi. And this is
Brian. Hi.
This is our kitchen table where we eat our meals.
Sometimes eat our meals. We also eat in front of the TV.
Very rarely. Not so rarely. Can we not?
You started telling them things, so
I am telling them some things we do in the house
so
together.
we sit in the house.
We sit.
We stand in the house.
We stand.
We go upstairs.
Go upstairs.
We go downstairs.
Downstairs. In the house.
In the house.
In the house.
You want a divorce.
I didn't say that.
Well, that's what not doing the marriage would mean.
I know.
So that's what you want?
Shit. Can you slow down?
Is Gala here? Gala Martin?
I'm Gala.
Hey, I'm Brian.
Yeah, I know. I've been watching.
I think you know my friend Bruno.
Yeah.
Bruno called me just before. He said that I should meet you.
Right now.
That is what I was thinking.
You just found out you got divorced. I don't know, maybe take some time?
It's theatrical time. It's compressed. And Bruno was like, hey, you should call her. So I thought I will call her. That's what's happening now. I'm singing this song, taking my time. Whoa, look, it rhymes and the band sounds great. And it doesn't feel too soon or late.
This might not work.
Just teach me the song.
This just feels wrong.
I'll sing along.
We've lived different lives.
Are we singing or talking?
This might not
I like
work.
cats.
Allergic. This might not
Okay, so
work.
we won't have cats. We'll have dogs. We'll have dogs.
Only fosters.
Well, aren't you a fucking saint?
This might not work.
But it just might.
You were out decades ago.
I know I was.
And then you
now
disappeared.
Sing with me. Stay
You missed
in
coming
the
to my last Christmas
song
in the house on the
with me. I love that house.
You missed Sundays at the boiler room.
By the sea. Do you still wanna dance with me?
You missed all the funerals.
The song's more fun.
John's funeral.
Can't
Bill's
you
funeral.
see? Okay, no more fun. Obviously.
Michael, Sam, Jade. Who else had AIDS?
Stop. Don't sing that.
You missed the hard.
Divorce is just a verb. And divorce, hey, that's a noun too. Baby, let me diagram a sentence for you.
All of this is in a house. All of this is in a house.
Thank you, Leslie. So we have time for a few questions, I hope, but before we open the floor to question and answer, I thought I'd just remind you that right after we've ended this conversation, there's a few ways you can further engage with the Autolith Group's exhibition here at the Neubauer Collegium. If you're joining us via Zoom, following the Q&A at around 5:30 p.m. Central Time, wherever you may be, we'll be showing a 35-minute Autolith film titled MassCon, a massive concentration of Black experiential energy, which is currently on view at the Neubauer Gallery until January 10th. For our in-person audience, you can either head directly to the gallery, or you can watch the film here and then wander over to the gallery, whatever order you prefer. Now let's open up to questions from both the in-person and virtual audience. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone. It will arrive to you, and then that way our virtual audience will hear the questions as well. I think maybe for the virtual audience, yes, because there are thousands of people
more
listening
about
around the world.
more about accessing your work, Leslie. When can we see that? What's going to happen with it? And also about the dancing. Where are those things available for people in the area who want to keep up with it?
Awesome. Keep an eye out of season announcements for next year. That's what I would say. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Because we can promote through Neubauer, I'm guessing that these projects will, they'll have season announcements. But the project that's based on the Eugene O'Neill play will have a public showing next June.
Yeah, June 28th and 29th at the Logan Center for that piece. Yeah, and then hopefully out here the musical will have its premiere production in Chicago next year, but that's not confirmed yet. But hopefully, thank you.
I guess that's one great thing about the Arts Lab kind of idea is that, we get to preview things with each other as they're in progress and in early stages of development, and then, and that might help them to get out in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the work in progress showing of Facing will be just a work in progress showing where we're going to be testing the vocabularies that we're working with, but then the premiere then we'll have another pre-premiere residency in Wisconsin in September, and then ideally spring, either fall right after that, or the next spring we'll have a Chicago premiere.
We have one question in the virtual audience for Tina, just about your lab. If there's a publicly available list of what you all have read and watched.
There is, it's just in a Google Sheet, which is not locked. I think it's maybe anyone with a link. So if anyone drops me an email, I'm happy to share that link.
We have another live question.
Thank you. I think, Chicu, you mentioned at the start that the Division of the Humanities is moving to become Division of Arts and Humanities, and I was just curious more as to the timeline on when that's going to be official, and what was the reasoning behind that shift.
It's funny, just when you were saying that, the penny dropped poetically about the word division, and division of the arts and humanities sounds like it's dividing the arts from the humanities. But this is an integration. It's a really exciting time across fields and disciplines. And I think David would probably know a little bit more about the timeline, because David has done a lot of really amazing work with bringing the arts and humanities together here at the university.
Which is a polite way of saying that I've got a lot of experience as a bureaucrat, and so but I think all of us have been involved in trying to continue to promote the evolution of the arts at the University of Chicago. As many of you may know, the arts have not always had the most delightful time at the University of Chicago. Some might say that the fact that the arts occupy the margins of the university geographically reflects their position in the sort of intellectual geography of the university. I think a lot of us would also, though, say that as a result, the artists are sort of constantly traversing the university, and with the emergence, and I think it is really a literal emergence more than a decade ago, of the Logan Center for the Arts, all of a sudden the arts had a real place at the university. And what was a quaint chalet adjacent to it for creative writing, it became sort of like a network. And the Gray Center DOVA, the Department of Visual Arts, creative writing on the south side, music in the middle, and art history on the north side with the Smart Museum, Court Theater on the north side of campus. All of a sudden, it looks like an ecosystem. And the Division of Humanities, I should also mention Theater and Performance Studies, which I think the four of us represent, so like I'm not really sure why I wouldn't have remembered that. We're in the Logan Center as well. It feels like the arts, which previously were nowhere in particular, but primarily in the college, have matured such that it makes sense for them to become integral to the identity of the humanities division. There are lots of arts and humanities divisions around the country. That there would be one at the University of Chicago suggests we may be late to the game, but ideally we're snappy and inventive. And the work that we're doing intellectually and the work that we're doing creatively can come into a productive dialogue with each other. And so this Arts Labs is very much in the context of that emergence, that we're trying to figure out what smart art looks like at the University of Chicago, what forms it might take. And I think, Deborah Nelson is the new dean of the Division of the Humanities and has been emphatic in her interest in supporting the arts in their dialogue, not just with the humanities, but with the rest of the divisions at the university. I think with the strong support of the provost and president. Spoken like a true bureaucrat. So.
One last quick question before we, yes?
Here comes the mic. The poem you chose to read.
Can we put that back on the screen? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, so
thanks, Rich.
When you selected this, I found that it's bereft of any grammatical, comma, whatever, like W.S. Merwin. Was that so an funny influence? Because I was wondering how you were reading it, where you took your pauses, because where you take the pauses gives it a different meaning. So was that a deliberate choice by this Mr. Miles Mikovsky? Because W.S. Merwin has nothing to do with, Arabic work. I was just very curious about that.
Yeah, it's remarkable that you mentioned W.S. Merwin, who is a major American poet of the late 20th century and early 21st century as well, because Merwin is a poet who's very important, I think, to this translator and I think to this poet as well. And I think the push and pull of language and pause in this piece of linguistic art is something that I never know how to navigate until I actually begin reading and breathing through it. So the next time I were to read it, I might read it with very different.
It got into my mind what you do, movement and reading words, depending on where you take the pauses. It's you translate the lyricism of the words into movement of sentences, like you guys at that stage. It's very clever. Thank you.
I think that's a perfect note to end on the intersection of movement and lineation in poetic art. This is actually a kind of conversation that we've begun to have among ourselves through these Arts Lab seminars. And we're really excited and grateful to have shared this work with you today. So thank you, panelists. Thank you to everyone at the Neubauer for being such gracious hosts for our projects and for today's event. And thank you for all your questions and for participating in today's panel. We hope you continue to engage with our arts and humanities programming and join us again for Humanities Day 2025 next October. Now that I've arrived at the end of the boilerplate language, we'll begin playing our video. Thanks so much.